Top of the morning to you. Thank you for joining us today. So we're happy to give you an offer of our new bank that we're starting out. It's called Fr-Aud. See here, now you can do anything that you need to do with this bank. You can do any kind of checking, cashing, and even credit cards. All you need to do is provide us with your home address, your current credit card numbers, and of course, your social security number. We'll be more than happy to assist you. All right now. And with that, we're starting our presentation. Hi, thank you for joining us, everyone. That was a interesting prologue. I'm sure you're thinking. Um, my name is Christian Smith, and I'm a student at the University of Houston Victoria campus, Katy campus. And so I'm mainly just going to basically be presenting to you, drum roll please, credit card fraud detection, and mainly just breaking it down to you. And so the way that we're going to break this down is going to be three parts. So our three parts are going to be part one, fraud. Basically, where you get an understanding of exactly what fraud is and how it incorporates and how we also work with the how it incorporates into the whole grand scheme of things. And then part two of that, once we define fraud, we're going to then define fraud detection. How do we detect fraud whenever it comes our way, or at least whenever it's there, where it's apparent? What methods do we have? What methods do we use? And lastly, part three, which is going to be from detection to deterrence. Basically, how do we use those methods of detecting to basically deter future fraud? So first to start, just to kind of make sure that I kind of clear up exactly what that was in the beginning there, our lovely guest host there, let's call him Frank the fraudster, who's basically trying to do one known form of fraud, which is basically just presenting something to you that is fake. So to begin, credit card fraud. What is fraud? Fraud is the intentional deception to secure unfair or unlawful gain or to deprive a victim of a legal right. That is the base definition of fraud, but of course when we bring credit cards into this, that brings in the whole financial aspect of it. And when it comes to the financial aspect of it, that is what America is basically built upon. Cash is king here. If you don't have money, you can't do anything, from even whether that's basically buying yourself some food, getting a place to stay for the night, even getting water, basic necessities. Medical, don't even think about it. So, credit card fraud, basically it's that financial sector mixing in with the already known definition of fraud itself and combining the two. So ways of fraud are, like I said earlier, our buddy Frank the fraudster was basically trying to present to a person, hey, come take part in our bank, just give us all of your information, and then we'll basically open an account for you in our bank, and you'll get a lovely credit card from the French bank Fr-Aud. And so another method, of course, that which people use, or at least that's commonly known for people to use to steal, excuse me, is going to be NFC. So near field communication is actually hold on, let me backtrack a little bit. Whenever credit cards that came out, there was this lovely card, of course, we all knew about the swipe right here, the black strip on the back, the magnetic stripe. So whenever this was first invented, it was like, okay, cool, you could just swipe, 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 go crazy with it. But they wanted to find a way to make it more secure, because sometimes when swiping, maybe the magnet didn't work, or maybe the magnet messed up, or maybe they put it into a fraudulent device, and so therefore now all their information was stored in there. Well, they invented this lovely thing, the chip system right. Oh wait, ooh, I'm so sorry. The chip system right here. So they invented the chip system right here, in which basically was more protection for individuals, for people. So for the customers, I mean. And with the chip system, basically, they created a very secure network where it was like once you pop that chip in, basically it just reads what's on that chip and then through the card reader, and then there you go. It sends the funds, processes the transaction as needed. Now, a system that was brought in after that is the new tap to pay. This card is not a tap to pay, sadly, but I do have tap to pay cards, but this card doesn't work anymore. So, with the tap to pay system, basically it uses near field communication to communicate between the card reader, the card scanner, and for the transaction, and of course your card. So there's like a magnetic field basically that talks, and it's like, hey, what details are we using to pay for this transaction? And the card's like, well, use these details, and so it inputs all those details into just a simple tap function. Now this is of course convenient, faster, no need to even pop it in there, good. But at the same time, that near field communication can be interrupted and even copied using something like a flipper in the cybersecurity community. That's something that's very well known. If it's configured properly, it can take those credit card numbers and copy them onto that flipper, and then that flipper can be used in the future. So let's say somebody basically walks up to me, does the old classic, bumps into me. Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry, have a wonderful rest of your day. If they were able to get close enough to my tap to pay card without the proper protections put in front of it, they're now able to have my credit card numbers and use those for the future reference, for the future. Of course, as I stated earlier, another method of fraud is the fake credit card receivers and on ATMs, and of course fake websites, Fr-Aud, to say the few. And then basically when you input that information in there, now that website has all of your information. Now those nefarious actors, bad actors, have your information, and they can use that to exploit you and of course use your funds. And of course the old-fashioned way is just walking up, taking your card, or of course stealing it from your person. Those are other ways of just basically committing credit card fraud. Some of the more common ways. And from there, we're going to move on to, of course, some real world examples. So I wanted to use some examples from media to help to make it easy for people to understand. So for example, we have John Connor in Terminator 2. He was using a system, a credit card, basically a transceiver. In a sense of speaking, he popped a fake card in there, and he was able to exploit that and exploit that using that fake card and basically exploit the ATM to basically shoot out money for him, even though of course it wasn't a real card, not tied to his bank account. In the movie, Emily the criminal, she's basically a down on her luck individual who basically starts to do scamming as a way to get into making more money for herself so she could basically fund her life and fund the things that she needs. And of course, it takes a wrong turn. She becomes a criminal. Now, one of those factors that she does is, of course, credit card fraud, where they take credit cards that are either A, stolen, or B, that they're copied, and they use those to buy items, and then they use those items to, the items that are bought, they basically resell them to make money or profit off of them, because, they didn't spend any money, but now they're making money from it. And of course, in a popular show, Family Guy, Peter loses his wallet in an episode, and then the returning villain, James Woods, comes back and uses his identity, uses his credit cards to basically get his identity and take over. And he says like, oh, I'm Peter Griffin now because I have social security number, identification or ID, and of course credit cards. And there you go. Now, and then of course my own personal experience with fraud. This has happened to me before. I don't know. I remember it was roughly like 2 or 3 years ago. I was mainly just minding my own business, and then I got an alert on my phone which said, "Hey, you're $700 over your spending limit," and I was just like, "Excuse me?" So I went to check my bank account, and I noticed that there were charges for Pizza Hut, McDonald's, Subway. This person was eating good. It may have been a group of people, but regardless, I called up my bank and I was like, "Hey, this wasn't me." And they were basically like, "Okay, it's not a problem. You're not at fault. We're gonna go ahead and just remove all the charges." So they removed all the charges, and everything was golden. Now, with that being said, of course, there's a ways to detect those. So I mentioned the alert system. So I'm gonna start from the bottom here. So we can use modern methods, of course, to detect fraud. Now, simple things, cameras and standard surveillance. If you see somebody on a camera, of course, taking a credit card, stealing from somebody, hey, we've detected that form of fraud. If you see somebody copying, we've detected that form of fraud. Another way is, of course, watching for anomalies, do trend lines of a person's purchases. Now, that I'm going to get into later, so just sit tight on that one. Excuse me. But another one is going to be that spending limits and maximums. This is kind of goes hand in hand with the alert system, but it isn't exactly that. So your spending limits and maximums could be something along the lines of, let's say a person has a limit set to on their card set to basically 1,500. Now a person would know their spending limit. Now anyone who doesn't know their spending limit is going to basically take that card and try and make a $3,000 purchase, $2,000 above that limit, and that alert system, or at least that can be kind of seen as a fraudulent charge, especially if they try and do it twice or 3 times. Therefore, it can trigger the system, and then the system can be like, "Hey, lock this card." Another one could be recurring payments, so it could be of small increments, so like something like a nickel or a penny every second, or every other day, or something of that nature. These smaller numbers would slowly come out of the account. Your average person wouldn't notice it, but of course, the bank can have systems set in place, kind of going back to that anomaly system that we spoke on. Where that they can use the anomaly system to detect it and say, "Hey, you know what, we're going to go ahead and safeguard this account and lock this account, do a soft lock on the account even." That's also another factor, another feature. And then lastly is, of course, that alert system that helped me, which is a simple system where you basically send a text to where it's like, "Hey, you've sent, your bank sent you a text saying, 'Hey, there's a charge placed for this amount. Is this you?' Or, hey, we see that you tried to do a cash advance of $50 from your credit card. Was this you?" And then, of course, just checking and saying, yes, no, okay, cool. Simple things, and this can of course plays a factor also into when it comes to alert systems. If banks know about fraudulent sites, they can of course blacklist those sites and of course certain places, because if there's been a lot of fraud happening on those locations, so they're like, hey, we don't allow payments to these web addresses. So for the examples that were given before, the camera system can go in hand when it comes to John Connor. A camera can easily detect him and say, they can pick up all the information and they can see, hey, this person genuinely is not using an actual credit card to access this card system. And Emily the criminal, basically Emily made some mistakes along the way, and therefore she was flagged by the FBI system, and therefore then she was tracked down and of course hunted a little bit, because they wanted to apprehend her because of all the credit card scams and all the scamming and all the fraud that's happened. And their system that they use is very similar to an anomaly detection system, which again I'm going to get into into later. It's going to basically break it down to where it's easily understandable. And of course, with the Family Guy reference, there was where James Woods, when he appeared. If Peter had realized sooner that he had lost his wallet, he easily could have called the credit card company and said, hey, can you cancel my card? I can't find my wallet. Things of that nature. Because with his wallet and with his credit card, James was able to basically create a whole new identity, or at least recreate Peter's identity, but for him. And then from my experience, of course, like I already stated, I had the alerts come to my phone, and with those alerts, I was basically able to realize that, hey, someone has my information. And now I've been able to lock it down even more secure, and I haven't had those issues since. So, of course, as I spoke about earlier, a definitely different modern technique, which wasn't there, maybe 50, 60 years ago, but then again, how long has the credit card system been around? We have things like, algorithms, and on the coding side, we have anomaly detection. Anomaly detection is generally understood to be the identification of rare items, events, or observations which deviate significantly from most of the data and do not conform to a well-defined notion of normal behavior. In layman's terms, is basically whenever you notice that something is different from the norm, that normally happens with that usually happens with a certain event or certain person. So a good example would be, let's say Sally Joe goes to get coffee every morning, Monday through Friday, because she has, of course, a Monday through Friday job. She goes to get coffee from same Starbucks. She eats lunch from the same place, and then she gets gas on every Friday. So let's say this one week there's no holiday. Sally Joe basically decides to not go to Starbucks, and she ends up going to Pizza Hut, Subway, McDonald's, and she buys like concert tickets. And when come that Friday, she never gets gas. At that point, or yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Let's make that a Thursday, and then like that following Friday, she never gets gas. At that time, the anomaly detection system can say, hey, this isn't what's normal for this person, and they can definitely send a response through like, hey, were these charges you? We noticed that there's some discrepancies in the differences, from your spending, and it's very easy to track people based upon their spending. So an algorithm can be made basically using anomaly detection as its root to basically pick up that information. But the main challenges that come into when it comes to making an algorithm of that nature, you're going to have an enormous data set. You can have imbalanced data availability, misclassified data, and of course adaptive techniques that are used that that the algorithm may not be able to predict. So to break that down, enormous data. Imagine you're somebody like Chase Bank. You have, of course, we're going to shoot low. You have like 10 million, 100 million users, different accounts open. So therefore, this is a lot of data for you to process. So your algorithm has to be able to take all these factors into account and work with them. And the imbalance of data. Maybe, one account has more data than the other, and so therefore you're like trying to basically filter in what information is needed, what information isn't needed, because you're going to have all these extenuating circumstances. Like you don't need someone's birth date to track the anomalies in their account. Again, data availability, since this of course is bank accounts, there are going to be some secure accounts in here where that information won't be easily accessible. So you have to make it to where your algorithm is able to easily access this information within a rapid response time. Misclassified data. Again, going back to the birth date, we don't need the birth date whenever we're coming into whenever it comes to basically defining what information is needed when it comes to building this algorithm. And the adaptive techniques, that is basically going to be the advancement of time. Simply, people who want to do nefarious things will get better at doing that. There will be holes and exploits always found. A real world example that could definitely be seen, let's say you had your anomaly system already detect, and your algorithm found it. Well, as a system administrator, what they could do is basically use the group and user commands to, let's say if the whole group is affected, they can use those group commands within a Linux system, and they can basically say, hey, you know what, we're going to quarantine this one. We're going to cut all the access to any other groups, make sure that they're quarantined. Or, and let's say they are able to catch it whenever it's the first user that's hit with it before they're able to push into more users. Again, quarantine it. Just quarantine it and just lock it off to make sure utilizing those Linux commands within the Linux database system, if that's of course what they're using. So, lastly, of course, we have detection to deterrence. So, how do we deter fraud and prevent it from happening in the future? So, the main methods are going to be, of course, your penalties and jail time. So, your jail time can be anywhere up to 20 years, depending, of course, your charge. And let's say you have, I think it's like the actual number is like once you hit over, I want to say it's like $2,000 or $3,000. That's whenever you actually start getting jail time. Anything before that, you may most likely get blacklisted or banned. So a bank can blacklist you or ban you, and if they basically have your name on a list that's shared, of course, amongst the biggest banks, they can basically say, hey, don't open an account for this person because they are known to commit fraud. They are known to be a bad actor, so therefore we don't want to handle their money, no matter how much it is, because we don't know if it's clean money. Other ways to deter it can be, of course, protecting your physical wallet so no one can steal it. And then the last one's going to be that RFID protection to stop theft. So the RFID protection kind of goes back to that near field communication that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. And with that, basically, it's equivalent to basically just putting a simple piece of tinfoil in your wallet, or you can get certain wallets that are made for it, as shown above. And with that, basically, you're able to just, like, that near field communication signal isn't given out, and so therefore, if someone wants to bump into you, you're fine because they can't get your information. And so lastly, closing notes, as I said, time progresses, those adaptive adaptive learning models and from the nefarious actors, they're going to basically be improving. So there's a currently growing need for protection from fraud in companies like JP Morgan Chase, Charles Schwab, Bank of America, just to name a few. They're actively hiring currently with attempts to build a team that's strong and ready for anything that's coming their way, because they understand that, as time progresses, this is only going to get stronger and stronger. It's only going to get stronger and stronger. So therefore, they need to make sure they have a team that's very cohesive, concise, and ready to fight whatever comes their way. Lastly, thank you for your time, and I want to leave with a quote from Notorious B.I.G. himself: "More money, more problems." Have a wonderful day, everyone.